Hi. Some of you have seen the show. Some of you perhaps haven't, and I assume you will. I'm Michael O'Sullivan, former Washington Post critic and co-curator of the show with Tom Drymon, who is an artist, co-curator of this show, curator in his own right elsewhere, gallerist, writer, designer. Am I forgetting anything?
I think that's it.
This is Tim, Makepeace, the artist. He created the work we're about to talk about. It's mostly a single body of work on the subject, or inspired by directly, and in some cases more loosely, by the James Webb Space Telescope, which he was invited to look at while it was under construction at Goddard Space Flight Center, probably 9 years ago. 9 years ago. And since then, he has almost, or literally, obsessionally been making work inspired by the thing itself, and eventually what it was sent to space to do, which is to look at the universe, our universe.
Yeah, right?
So we're going to start at the very beginning, when you heard about the project at Goddard. I'm curious if you could explain what your original intention was. Were you looking forward to documenting the creation of the telescope? Did you start formulating a body of work at that time? What were you thinking when you began?
I also am looking forward to this explanation.
Should we ask her?
Just make something up. We'll buy anything. This all began, I guess, in 2017. I'm not a telescope guy. I'm not an astronomer. I know nothing and didn't know anything about any of this stuff here. I'm an artist who's interested in industrial architecture, like that blue piece over there, or some of the other things over there. That's what I've done mainly. So I'm interested in mechanical things, geometry, architecture, artistic movements I've been interested in are constructivism and precisionism, which deal with geometry and things like that. And so there was a call for artists from NASA. I just happened to see it on Facebook. And I was like, come on, apply to this thing to come out to Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt and make some art about the telescope that's under construction. And hopefully you have a big social media presence, and we will, use your outreach to help promote the telescope, because NASA is always afraid of Congress cutting your budget. So the idea was that this would, the more people that know about it, the harder it is for them to cut the budget. I know what I'm talking about. So I guess it was a bit of propaganda, and I was very happy to go along with it. And so eventually I got out there, and I was one of the artists that got to see the telescope under construction. I took a lot of pictures, and it was very exciting. And, by the time I got there, I did a little homework, got onto that Google machine and typed in GWST, question mark, what the hell, and then I found a bunch of stuff. And so by the time I got out there, I realized, like, this is the coolest, most amazing thing. And not only visually amazing, but scientifically, and all the creative ideas, hurdles that people overcame to build this crazy machine. So it was very exciting. And I did a couple drawings, and they're out in the hall, and they had an exhibition for a group show at the visitor center. And that was great. And that was the end of it. But by the time we were done, I was just beginning, because just the more you learn, the more exciting it is, and the more there is to know. And so I did and I had a lot of photographs, so I did more pieces from the photographs I took in person. Then I found other photographs from NASA's official photographer. His name is Chris Gunn. So I used some of that as source material, and then I kept going and did various other images that were sort of the telescope from close up. I think I drifted off the question.
You're into my second.
We're gonna have to back up. Erase that. We'll fix it in the edit. Don't worry.
So we apologize in advance for this stuff.
There's a lot to apologize for. What was the question?
I'm going to throw the next question in.
All right, I'm gonna pick up a little bit on the part of your question that maybe wasn't answered so much. And I think Tom was asking about the your aim or motivation in getting into this work. And I don't know that he asked this initially, but when we talked about one of his questions was about the documentary nature of it. To what degree do you see this as a documentary effort? And that kind of leads into what I wanted to ask about, which is that striking that perfect balance between art and science, because we struggled with it. The three of us struggled with that, not wanting this to be all science or just all kind of woo-woo, but a little bit of both. And maybe you didn't want the woo-woo, but we did. So can you talk about the documentary aspect of it and when it kind of began to shift away from simply looking at and documenting the physical object to sort of other ideas?
Yeah, it was never really about documenting the thing. You know, NASA's got an official photographer of that, and he's a really good guy, and he does great stuff. But that's not what I was after. I wasn't here to document, it's what it looks like in totality, or all the various angles you could take photos or whatever of. So these are often narrowly cropped, which heightens the abstract nature. So because my background is also in sculpture and photography, so I'm interested in the sort of sculptural elements, and I like finding abstraction within reality. So that's sort of the photography element too. So they're not documenting. The one that's closest to documenting is that blue and gold one in the hall down there, which is sort of half the telescope, and that's as close as I got to like showing the thing in its entirety. All the other things are just sort of pieces that are very sculptural, very, very abstract. And then the second question was about art and science. So I don't really like to divide that. A lot of artists get nervous about science, and a lot of scientists get nervous about artists. But more artists get nervous about science than they would ever. In fact, I've come across many people, when you start talking about the science, they just get angry, which is surprising me. But it's like, I don't know, would you say if you were a landscape painter painting trees, like how do you separate your art from the botany and your subject matter? Or if you're a figurative painter, how do you separate what you're painting from, scientific anatomy? So, one is the inspiration for the other, not necessarily a division that you have to explain. So for me, it was this science. The science is the inspiration, just like a tree.
Well, a botanical illustrator is different from Charles Birchfield, who's painting trees that all have this anima, the spirit. They almost seem like they are people, or that they have emotions, and a botanical illustrator isn't doing that. So there is a difference. I mean, it's not an arbitrary distinction. Right?
Look, I'm going to make you work.
This is what the last 16 months have been like.
It's just been a battle. We've been battled.
Is it Tom's turn to ask? Okay. Are you done? Are we done? I'm over.
Yeah, you should have been a fly on the wall in my studio visits, where we tried to draw certain aspects out of Tim related to what Michael just said.
The woo-woo.
The woo-woo. So you pursued this subject matter for a very long time.
Use the microphone.
You pursued this subject matter a very long time. It's too close. It's good. How has your relationship changed from the first efforts to the very last thing you did, which was really on the very large pieces, right? For the installation. How did your relationship change with the work and the making of the work over time? And how did you go about finding new ways to create work about the same subject matter?
So I started with the photographs that were kind of close up, like these ones back here and ones in the hall. Then so this is all kind of, it's a journey of the telescope, but it's also a journey of my sort of interest in it and how it has evolved, right? It's evolved from these photographic elements and these sort of very tight drawings to sort of the orbital mechanics of its flight and how, and my continued relationship with it, even, the great distance notwithstanding. So this whole exhibition there's kind of a progression, a journey in the exhibition. And, in 2001, they launched the thing. From the very beginning, I had this connection because, I knew I was 30 feet away from it when I took all these pictures. And I just knew that this is going to, from the very first moment, I knew that this is a major achievement. And I'm next to this thing, and at some point, it's going to be 1,000,000 miles over there for more or less eternity. And I will have had this time with it. And so that was one of the things that drove me on, and that's why I did a lot of these things. And then they launched it in 2021. And then that was the end, right? And I asked people at NASA, and I know other people asked, like, will we ever see it again? Because, not that it's interesting to other people, but I had this connection, and I just want to know, can I see it? And the answer is, no, not going to see it. It's too far, too small, too dim. And we're not interested because we're only interested in the data downlink. We're not interested in seeing it. We just want to see the imagery that it creates. But then I found a guy who, another amateur astronomer in Italy, and he had access to a kind of university level telescope, and he found the position of the telescope, and he imaged it. It's this picture of stars and telescope going across it, like, and I just thought that was so cool. That's what I wanted, and it was very emotional because there it is, proof, it's still there. And I felt that connection. So I thought, well, maybe I can borrow someone's telescope, learn how to use it, go someplace dark. I don't know, that's a lot of ifs. That's a hassle. And then what am I going to do with a photograph? It's the same as the other guy's photograph. And that's why I'm just going to draw it anyway. And since I know what I wanted to draw, I know what the image was, so I just, found the position of the telescope myself, and made the drawing myself, and that's over on the other side there. So it's a drawing of the telescope, tiny, the thinnest line I could draw, this long. And so that's the faraway view of that. So that's where this next journey of the progression of all this went. So it was sort of following its orbital path in different ways and thinking about it in different ways. And that led me to a series of things that you can see around here where I got interested in the orbital mechanics of other things too. And that's it.
That answered my question.
Okay, as you know, I first wrote about you 25 years ago. And in that, it was very different work, but not entirely different. It's all of a piece, as you told me then, and I think that has borne out over time. that there's this continuity. But you told me at that time, I fight for control and often lose, and often I'm the better for it. What you were referring to was your influence by the precisionists, to use your own word, your identification as a tight artist, somebody who is very precise and meticulous about your rendering. And if you were fighting for control and often losing 25 years ago, one might think that over 25 years you've gotten better at control so that you don't lose. But I'm curious as to whether that's the case, and if there is an example or examples in this show where accident entered into it and you allowed it to enter in, and how in your current practice do you create space for accident to creep in, if you do?
I am a very tight artist to a fault.
What?
So yeah, I'm interested in control because, I have an idea when I begin. I know what I want to do, and I spend a lot of time figuring out how am I going to achieve that. So I don't throw paint around. I'm not an abstract expressionist, so I haven't learned anything. But every once in a while, to make people like Michael happy, I splash some paint around just to see that I can do it and see what happens.
You succeeded in making me happy with this show.
So I have one piece in here where it was an image of the black hole at the center of our galaxy, and I painted the lines with very wet India ink and Sumi ink, and so it's just kind of like big brush strokes and just very wet, so the ink bleeds, and whenever the ink is bleeding, you have no control over that. So I did a couple pieces like that, and I did a couple other things like that, just to see what it feels like and what the results were, and I didn't like it. But it came out all right, so it's in the show. So I went back to being a control freak.
One of the questions I was asked during the opening, I didn't mention this to you, but people suppose that Tim had a massive studio in which to make this work. And you would probably be surprised to learn that a lot of this work was made in his basement in his home, right? With a ceiling that is maybe 8 feet high, not even, right? So it's impressive that work of this scale is made in such an environment. That's not my question. My question is, what is your relationship to scale? And why do you create works at this size? And does it relate to the subject matter or what you're trying to say about the subject matter?
My studio has just a towering 7-foot-high ceiling, and it also has this beautiful, not northern light because it's in the basement. So it was a challenge doing this big stuff. I'll talk about the thing that's out there, that 13-foot Miri Cam jumbo version, and the curvy thing on the back side of this wall.
Do you want to say what a Miri Cam jumbo version is or means?
No, it's a secret. It's a mid-infrared imager. But anyway, this big, wild-looking, crazy, abstract drawing / painting / drawing is, why did I make it that big? Well, one, there's some giant walls here, and Tom and Michael are like, what are you doing that big wall? You gotta do something big. It's like, I've never done anything that big. It's just a lot of work. I don't want to do that. You gotta have something. So that was one reason. But the other reason is it's big. Big is a relative term, right? So that is a very big drawing. The cameras, well, as cameras goes, it's a big camera, but it's like 3.5 feet, 4 feet, 4 feet. So like so. But, you know, the drawing is, you know, big is a relative term, so it's bigger than what? It's bigger than me. You know, it's bigger than all the people involved in making it, including Professor Merritt. That's, you know, that it's an incredibly impressive feat of engineering, and it's a beautiful thing. And that's what I was attracted to. So there are incredible aesthetics to it, but it's just, you know, not only is it bigger than everybody, but I'm smaller than it. I'm smaller than all of this. So it's a relative thing. And then the drawing on the back of this wall, this big curvy thing, that was to solve another problem with that curved wall. Is very difficult to hang work on. And either you do small things or it becomes a problematic. So the three of us were brainstorming on how to deal with this problem, and we came up with this idea of doing something custom for that wall. So it's well, not the whole width, but substantial part of the width of the length of the wall. And the idea being that, I mean, it's important that it's that big because it's a simple idea. It's two parts. It's A and B, left and right, and gets to the point of the show that we discussed, which is the ghost in the machine. It's about the material and the immaterial, the mind and the body. So on one side is the image of the camera, which is sort of the body. It's solid. It's a mechanical thing. The other side is an image of the black hole, center of our galaxy, and that is real. You know, anytime you're talking about a black hole, you're talking about singularities or things that are infinitely dense. And anytime you're talking about infinity, you're talking about something that's unknowable. So that's also intangible. And so that's the intangible side, and then there's a white line connecting the two. So it's sort of the space between the tangible and the intangible and how they go together. And then because it's curved, you know, you can't see one side from the other, so you have to travel to see the picture. So there's an element of time traveling in a curve, which is like an orbital ellipse. So you are now orbiting and you're part of this picture. And it's sort of also has something to do with how light travels in a straight line, but space is curved. And so it's actually, you know, everything is curved. So the drawing is curved, the frame is curved, everything in that picture is curved. You may not even feel it. Some people didn't even notice that the picture is curved on the top and the bottom until much later because, you know, once it's a relative thing. Like, you know, you feel like space is flat, but it's not because that's the way you experience it.
Okay, so we've talked about scale, and I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about color. You have said, so I'll bring your words back to bite you. You said, I'm not a color guy. And that may sound a strange thing to come out of the mouth of someone who's sitting in front of this wall and facing that majestic, mind-blowing, eye-popping, colorful piece under the stairwell. So there's a lot of grayscale in this show, true, but there's also a lot of color, and I wonder if you can talk a little bit about whether whether you can admit to embracing color and plan to. I mean, I know you're still making work about the telescope, but is this a new chapter in your career where you are bringing color in and bringing it in happily? If you do anything happily.
No, I'm not happy about it at all. I'm not a color guy. I don't think in color, but somehow there's a lot of color here. I don't know how that happened.
I start about the choices of illustrating light with color.
Yeah, so I justified this in a way because it's the mid-infrared image camera is collecting infrared. You can't see infrared, so this is all just simulated. So simulated with four primary inverse colors, CMYG, cyan, magenta, yellow, and green. So they're technical colors. Tom knows a lot about printing, about technical colors. So I can get behind technical colors. That made it okay. But often the colors are sort of like objects, That's the way I sort of feel like they are. So like these yellow pieces here, it's a yellow disc, but it's like a yellow object. And so, and then the current stuff is I'm working on more of these drawings about the light path through this camera because it's just that, it has this presence, and that's sort of what the point of the show is, this ghostly presence, because it's immaterial, you can't touch it. And how it, it's a beam of light, so it kind of glows, and how do you depict glowing light with paint? It gets to be tricky. So I'm sort of experimenting with that. I guess I'm now a colorist, so you've convinced me.
There is a wealth of technical information in the show, and I encourage everyone to. Sorry, you said to put it here. I did not. You said here. How's that? Can't hear me, can you? In my mouth. Okay. There's a wealth of technical information in the show, and there are QR codes everywhere, and I encourage you all to take advantage of that information. It's amazing. It's interesting. Overhearing a lot of people viewing the show, though, they wanted to first take it in, right? The visual aspects of it, to feel something, so to speak. So my question to you, and you kind of answered it in a way about the telescope being so far away, you do have an emotional connection both to the telescope but also to your work. Would that be fair to say? And did you have a moment once the installation was done that you just stood back and took it all in, and what did you experience? Because we wanted this to be an experience for people, right? We wanted them just to feel immersed. And so I'm curious about your own response to your work in the space.
I'm super honored to be here. It's an incredible opportunity to have this much room to show this many pieces of work and be able to explain this much, because it is complicated. There's definitely an emotional part to it, and I'm super satisfied with how the lighting came out. To make this sort of environment where it's. The air conditioning is always very cold in here, but when it's dark in here, it makes it much more contemplative in here, somber in a way, not a sad way, but it makes an environment, and so I'm really happy with the way this came out, and just the way the lighting is on the work but not on the walls. It sort of has a lot to do with space. Space is bright and dark, it's high contrast. So that was part of it. Wait a minute, now it's my turn. You're asking all the questions. Well, wait, I'm gonna ask a question.
What was the plan?
You'll find out.
What we do want to ask the audience eventually is, because we discuss so much about creating an environment, not just a show of one painting after the next, we really are curious about how you experience this yourself. And so if you want to chime in at the end, if you've already seen the show, or experiencing at the end, because we were trying to create the Tim Makepeace experience.
Drama, a sense of drama.
Right, a sense of awe, a sense of immersion in the, like you were in the telescope itself or in space. So we'd love to hear your responses to that effort that we have.
What I want to know is, why did you take on this job of curating this mess? You're not a science guy. You haven't curated stuff like this, and this isn't necessarily things that you were familiar with. Why would you have accepted this challenge?
You want me to start?
Go ahead.
I was kind of pushed into this. No, seriously. As the greatest thrill for me as a curator is learning. The opportunity to learn something new, to be exposed to new ideas, to be challenged, to be forced to do research, and to collaborate, really, on the ideas that an artist is trying to communicate. So, no, this was not something that was really in my field of interest necessarily. But the challenge of learning more about the telescope itself, learning more about your ambition for the show, really inspired me to work with you. And anyone I work with. I love to be challenged. I love feeling stupid. I say that to people. But the dumber I feel, the more excited I am about a project, you know, because it's an opportunity to learn. So that was my greatest motivation for this, taking this on.
That's sort of another way of saying that you're comfortable in this space of not knowing, I think. And that's
good.
And that gets to, I guess, my part of the answer to this. I wrote about Tim. I saw his work 25 years ago. I did a studio visit a year and a half ago to see this new body of work, and I was overcome by this feeling that there was this continuity. It was what Tim told me at one point, that he views his work all of one piece, whether he's taking photographs, making drawings, paintings, sculpture. And I wanted to put my finger on what this thing that I was feeling was when I looked at some of these older pieces, like these high tension wires, or around the corners of these industrial objects. And his earliest work that I wrote about in 2001. And I was struck that there was this quality in the James Webb Space Telescope work and in the earliest work of his I had ever seen, this sense of a presence, an immaterial presence, in addition to embodied by the physical object. And that was sort of the germ of this idea of the ghost in the machine, of this intangible thing in a tangible artifact. I've always liked your work. I was not forced into this, unlike Tom. So that's the answer. That's the answer to your question. My next question is about one piece in particular. And when I first did the studio visit, it's on this wall right back here. It's one second from the right. It's a suite of 3 drawings, and the one second from the right is basically an artifact of its making. It's essentially the stencil that you used to create the drawing on the far right. It's a mirror image. You call it an echo. And I strongly felt when I saw that among the pile of finished drawings that we should put that in the show, not just as sort of a way to show people how the piece was made, but as a finished artwork in itself. So I'm wondering if you would talk about those 2 pieces, the pieces on the right, and whether you consider the piece that you're calling the echo, whether you consider that a finished artwork or if simply a preparatory relic of the process of making it. Because several people at the opening told me that piece was one of their favorite, if not their favorite works in the show. Just this quiet little paper object covered with cellophane tape and your fingerprints with charcoal smudged all over them. And it's just this exquisite, quiet little thing. So can you talk about whether it's a finished piece or not a finished piece, or both?
I consider it a finished piece. It's framed, so it is a finished piece. That's how you know it's real art, if it has a frame on it. But I wanted to back up a little bit, back to the title of the show, and the Ghost in the Machine. So the problem I had with this show in the first place was my work is seemingly kind of disparate. There's pieces that look like this, and ones that look like this, and we've got pretzels over here, and we've got swirly McTwirlies over there, and you've got visually very different things. And so what was the unifying thing that would bring this together? Like, could you show all this together as a unified body of work? And so we worked on this for some months about this idea, and as Michael was saying, about this sort of presence. And so we came up with this idea of the ghost machine, which is the philosophical concept of, mind and body are separate. That was one idea, and then there's like mind and body are the same. And so this is somewhere in between. And so a lot of these pieces have something to do with the physical and or the immaterial, or the mind and the body, or time and space. And so that's the unifying thing. And then we get back to Michael's question about I call it the cartoon. It's just a tool. That's what it was. It was the tool to make the other thing. But, in the end, it took on a life of its own. And it fit exactly into this whole concept because it's just made out of tape. It's a mask I use to control the charcoal to do these sort of photorealistic drawings. And then when I cut out the shape, and I tape it back together, and then I cut out the next shape, and I tape it back together. In the end, you have this thing. And that's not the intent. The intent wasn't that, but it was the accident. It's a derivative, just like a lot of these things are derivatives of the thing before it. So that is a derivative of that, which is a derivative of that, which is a derivative of the telescope. So it's just this progression. But in the end, it's it's my essence. It's my dirty fingerprints on tape. There's nothing more to that drawing. It's just paper, cellophane tape, and dirty fingerprints. But that's the sort of clearest manifestation of the presence in all these pieces.
My turn. Circling back to that question about curation, when you answered the question about scale, it reminded me also that one of the through lines, I think, for all of us, well, in our conversations in the studio, was really about our place in the universe, man's place in the universe, and not only his place in the universe, but his hand in the work. So that was another aspect of the curation of the show that kept me captivated, asking these questions of myself and where we belong in the world, where we're minimized by technology, or are we better for technology? So those were all really interesting questions. I think that were a lot of studio visit fodder. But keeping that in mind, you finish this huge body of work. There's another telescope being developed. Do you see yourself turning your attention to that telescope and its use and what it might mean for data collection, for our knowledge of the universe, etc.? What's next?
Well, NASA did reach out to me to come out and look at the new one, which is the Nancy Grace Roman telescope, which they're going to launch at the end of August. So I have been out there a couple times to see that under construction, and I have taken some photos of that, and I'm contemplating how I can make the most of that thing. And then NASA also invited me to go down to Florida to watch it blast off from Cape Canaveral, so I might do that too. I don't know. So it's a little more difficult, this one, because I only saw it towards the end. It's not nearly as visually as compelling as the JWST. They're launching it out to the same spot, so it's going to be over there. It's going to be JWST's neighbor. The two of them can play together, I guess. And the point of that telescope is to survey our galaxy and learn more about dark matter, which we don't know enough about, unless you're not telling me something.
Okay, I have one more question, and then I think we'll try to open it up for questions from the audience. So think about what you want to say, comments, questions. Tim, you've often talked about the NASA scientists and engineers who built the telescope as not just scientists and engineers, but like artists. They were inventing something for which they did not have a blueprint. They weren't making another car on an assembly line. They were creating something like an artist does out of thin air. And you, as an artist, putting your attention to this artisanal object that NASA had created, you often found yourself in situations where you had to invent a way of rendering an idea or a physical thing that you didn't necessarily have a tool already in your arsenal for. Figuring out solutions to problems, like the mirrors that are that you sort of the imaginary mirrors that in some of these works over here, so that you can see, so that we can see what we're looking at. We're looking at the sky in front of us and the sky behind us, because there's basically an imaginary mirror that you're holding up that shows the star paths behind our heads. Or when you discovered that you wanted to put color in your work, you, I guess, went out and bought an air gun or something. So you had to invent new ways of creating something. Can you talk about that process? Maybe talk about specific works where you didn't have a tool, or whether that's a physical tool or sort of a conceptual tool, and to solve the problem that you encountered.
Well, again, back to the difference between art and science, and how I find very little distinction, because the people who worked on this telescope, again, they didn't have a blueprint. They had to invent a lot of things. And the amount of creativity it takes to come up with this stuff, you have to think outside the box. And good artists have to do the same thing. It's the same creative power. It's not different in any way. Just they're better at math. So that's it. If I could just add better, I would be a genius also. Yeah, I had to, a lot of these things, I have an idea, like this thing, I wanted to have all these rays of light converging, but like, how the hell do you do that? It took me a while to figure that out. So I had to make templates and learn how to slide them at diagonals, and I had to make a giant paraline ruler.
What?
A paraline ruler, like a thing that like draftsmen use on a table that moves up and down your table, always parallel. Lots of things. Like I had to make giant compasses to make those star trails. How the radius of that all changes. I mean, the length of those star trails change as you get closer to the center, and a lot of these things I sort of took for granted. Then you start drawing, you're like, that doesn't make sense. I don't understand what I'm doing until you understand what you're looking at. I find it very difficult to actually draw it. So I find a lot of inspiration from the scientists, because it's, and the engineers who worked on this, because it's the same problem. It's like, it's like good art. Lots of people make good art. It's like a bell curve, right? So most people are kind of in this area, but to make great art, you've got to do the thing that everyone else is not doing. So to make a great telescope, you can't just go to the telescope manual and make it. You've got to do the other thing that no one else is there to do. And that's what greatness is. In theory, that's what great art is too. It's the thing that no one else has ever done. So I find a very tight similarity between the two.
Okay, so there's, I think we're at the end of our questions. There's a lot of ideas in this show. There's a lot of dualities. Tim mentioned a couple of them. A telescope, he has said, and it is true, is a kind of time machine, because the light from the furthest reaches of the universe, by the time it reaches the mirrors and the camera inside the mirror, that's art from, light from what, millions of years ago, hundreds of thousands?
That's what you're looking at.
What you're looking at, what corner of the universe you're looking at. Large and small, powerfulness and powerlessness, all these sort of ideas that we hoped would percolate up through this intense obsessional study of a tool, an astronomical tool. So I hope with some of these ideas that we've touched upon and some we haven't touched upon, people in the audience will be now invited to raise your hands and make comments or questions if they have them. Someone back there? Yes. I think they're coming with a microphone for you.
Hey, Tim, very exciting show. I'm happy to see it.
Adrian.
You were talking about doing things that no one else has done, and you mentioned early on being 30 feet away from the telescope. Would you ever see it again? So I'm looking at the inner workings and the refractions and reflections of lighting and the sources of lighting, and I'm wondering, did you actually get the chance to examine this telescope at such close, granular range? Or is this imaginal and fantastical that came from you doing something that no one else does?
I got to see it about 30 feet away. It was in the clean room. I was not in the clean room. That was how close I got to it. All this is from things I found on the internet. So this is from a 3D model that the European Space Agency, who is the primary group on the mid-infrared imager, they made a 3D model and had like a video fly through, and I used stills from that video and tweak them a little bit here and there, but they are accurate. It's not my idea of what this thing looks like. It's my intention to display it as fundamentally accurate. I mean, there are lots of choices involved in it, but I mean, for this, another thing about this picture here, the background, I tried to render a rusty steel box. That was an inspiration I got from this artist, Michael Heiser, who's kind of an earth artist. And he has this large piece at the Los Angeles Museum of Contemporary Art. It's like an 8-foot tall, 100,000-pound boulder in a metal box embedded in the wall of the museum. I've just seen photos of it. I haven't seen it in person. But I had the image under control. I knew what I was going to do, but I was like, what about the background? Like, there's backgrounds and there's backgrounds. So I juxtaposed it with a facsimile of that artist's metal box. What he was trying to do was kind of the opposite. He had this incredibly primitive, what do you call it, this rock, which is as rough and crude a thing as you can imagine, displayed in this rusty box in this, beautiful, fancy museum. So this was sort of juxtaposing this amazingly precise instrument with this rusty box, which has elements of earth art in it. So it was sort of, that was a little play right there. But, I try to be faithful to the science in the end.
Yeah, so you focused on the telescope as an object, but you talked earlier about how the scientists were more interested in the data and the imagery that we get back from the telescope. So I guess I'm curious if you've been tracking any of the imagery and data that they've been getting back, and has that been something you're interested in?
Not exactly. I mean, it's such a specialized and big thing. So I'm not an astronomer. I've learned a little bit about astronomy, but that is not. It's just so much. The universe turns out is kind of big, and there's a lot out there. And let's really focus on it. Like, okay, you got this gaseous cloud and that gaseous cloud, and they mean different things to different people. And then, the JWST camera, like, isn't this a great picture of this, ball of gas? And it's like, I don't know. What's really cool is when you see it, like, compared to, like, the Hubble's version of that, or another telescope's version of the same gaseous cloud. And then you're like, wow, that is amazing. Like, how much better, how far you've pushed this thing. That is a lot more interesting than just seeing, one nebula and there's a, cluster. I'm not an astronomer, there's a lot to know about that. And so I have not been drawn to it, and I sort of intentionally not really wanted to draw pictures of astronomical things, except for this one black hole thing, that's where I started on my orbital mechanics stuff. But no, I didn't do that. Next.
Tim says over and over again, I'm not an astronomer. I'm just a humble country folk artist. But he knows a lot about this telescope, and maybe it doesn't seem like a lot to him, but there's a piece out in the atrium that he has explained. I have been present at its explanation 6 times, and I said only half jokingly the other day, I've heard this explanation of this piece 6 times, and it's like every time I hear it, it's like I'm hearing it for the first time. So there's a lot of, and when Jack Rasmussen, the director of the show, his second visit to Tim's studio, looked at the work, he said, you have a lot of explaining to do. Lucy? Yeah, in front row.
Hi. I am wondering, though you're not a scientist in all this, but I'm wondering with the work that you've done in this wonderful show, whether your feelings about the materiality of a black hole has evolved?
Materiality meaning what it is? Well, I showed these pieces at the National Academy of Science a few years ago, and I came up with an explanation about that. I'll repeat now, which is I started drawing those things just because I came across it because that is something that they wanted to use the telescope for. That's the only reason I got interested in this in the first place. So a group in California, the UCLA Galactic Center group and the European Space Agency group, they were interested in finding out what's at the center of our galaxy. So they had been studying this area for 10 years, and they had some 3D models they made of the stars orbiting the black hole, and it's very difficult to imagine. They did it, and the main woman who was the lead on the UCLA group, she was working with a Keck telescope and did some amazing things with that, and she ended up getting the Nobel Prize for her work on that thing. And I liked it just because they had made this cool 3D model, and it was very sculptural, and I just thought, well, that's cool. Could I draw that? And they're drawing ellipses, and can I figure out how to do this accurately? So I did, and it took me a whole series of those. But the only reason was because that they wanted to use it for the JWST. And you wanted to do that because this camera is an infrared camera, and there's a lot of dust and junk between us and the black hole. And so the infrared imager can see through dust better. That was all. But so I drew that, and so after I'd been drawing, I don't know, like 4 or 5 of these things, and you spend a lot of time doing them. So I think, why am I drawing this? Why were these 2 groups spending so much time and energy looking at that? There are billion things to look at out there. Why that spot? And I'd love to hear your opinion on that. But my opinion on it was that it's sort of people want to know like where they are, and you only know where you are relative to something else. So it's like a sense of place. So you only know that, I'm, 5 miles from the river, 10 miles from this, 100 feet from my car. So, knowing that you're 26,000 light years from the center, that's interesting to a lot of people. Also, knowing where the center is, historically is super important to a lot of people, mainly the Catholic Church. And so when people come around and say, yeah, I don't think the Earth is at the center of the universe, well, then they go to jail, because that's not good, because when you're the center, you're automatically imbued with power. You know, and someone says, well, you're not, and then automatically someone has stripped you of power, and people don't like that when they take your power away. So when, you know, Copernicus said, oh, I think the sun is the center, they didn't like that, and then Galileo came along and said, yeah, that's pretty much what it is, and then they put him in jail. So, you know, that I think is interesting. It's a sense of place and how important that is to people. You know, we're at the, you know, in Washington, D.C., it's the capital. It's the center of, you know, the political center, you know, so you have a certain amount of pride, and used to, but the presence and being here. And anyway, that sort of was layered up on top of those things. And that's all. Who's next?
So I'm wondering if, as you're progressing over the many years developing this work, if you've seen a change in how you use technology and in particular AI. And that came up a couple times in this conversation. One is the title of the show, Ghosts in the Machine. It seems like we're having a global debate or beginning a global debate as to whether this technology can actually become conscious and what's the line between humanity and technology. And then your colleague was talking about technical botanical renderings versus Charles Birchfield's more presence-based image of nature. And a lot of your work is so technical, right? So there's something about it that feels, well, is this moving into what used to be art, that is having to use such technical tools to create this kind of precision? And I know AI can be clunky and there's a lot of false hallucinations and things like that. But there's a lot in that question, if there's any piece of it that resonates with you. It's probably more about my thinking than your thinking, but I'd love your thoughts on the intersection of art and AI.
Well, AI is really good at doing good work. You know, I was talking about before, like the bell curve, AI is really good at the middle part. It's not good at the end. It can't do great things. It's, by definition, only can do the middle because it's averaging all the thoughts and all the whatever, you know, art and music and everything out there and coming up with good things, whatever that topic is. But it can't do great. That's just inherent. And so that's where people like John and Maka come in. They do great things. And then, what was
Thank you. There was a question as to whether you use AI in your work, you see that becoming a tool in addition to the other tools.
I would use AI, but I haven't in this. And then again, I think, you know, you can blend the two ideas, like between just, you know, making your prompt and having the thing come out the printer, which is sort of related to these photographic drawings. Like, why did I bother drawing those? You got the photographic technology. You can just push print, you know. You don't have to do that. But it changes it, of course. And there's several reasons for doing that. One is that it frees you from the stigma of photography, you know, the ease. This is definitely a negative connotation to that. The easier something is, the less value it has. And then there is also the value of sort of dedication. So if you spend 2 months, or if you know you're going to spend 2 months making one of these drawings, you make sure before you begin that it's cropped the best. It's the best of the 50 photos you have. You have adjusted the exposure, the contrast in your image, or whatever your reference photo is. You know, is this really the best version? Does the world need this picture? You know, and is it worth spending 2 months on? And if you could say yes to all that, then you go forward and you do it. But it forces you to do that. And so there is a value in spending all that time on it.
Not just 2 months on a single piece, but 9 years and counting.
Yeah.
Thank you. You say that you're not a color person, although it's clear that you're using color in very beautiful and striking ways. And I wonder if you could just talk a little more about your intention and your choices where color is concerned.
And with the color,
Again with the color. Jesus.
security,
I don't have a good answer, I guess. What I can say is that I've been doing art for most of my life, and I've looked at a lot of art, made a lot of art, and your choices in the end are largely intuitive. So, you go through the world, you look at stuff, it's like, I like that tree, I want to draw that tree. I don't know why I want to draw that tree, because it's a lifetime of intuitive thinking. Like intuitively I like it because, it's got a lot of neat structure, or the leaves are red, or whatever it is. You feel compelled for many reasons. It's not like I'm searching for a shape that is round with, green things on it, and there's one there. That's sort of probably putting the horse before the cart, but, this is much more, I don't know. So in the end, like, why did I choose yellow? I didn't really choose yellow to do that piece over there, or whatever it is. It was an image that I liked. I don't know why I liked it, but it's a lifetime of understanding and aesthetics that I have developed to get me to the point where I say, yeah, I like that. I think I'll draw it. Why? I don't know.
maybe he didn't choose yellow, yellow chose him. I don't know if everybody can see it, but this corner, this side of the wall, this gray wall behind us, is painted yellow, bright yellow. That same shade, that same exact shade of yellow. The catalog is that shade of yellow. Tim sort of, it's there for a reason. I mean, that wall was painted yellow by Tim. Not, it's just, I think color has infected him in a way that he's maybe not fully aware yet. We have time for a couple more questions, or we do not. Not one?
One more. Wait, I want to know from the curators, like, I also have to say, what's your favorite work here? But actually, I'm going to ask you, which piece do you hate the most?
I know, okay. I won't say that I hate it, but the piece that I...
Wow, you're really answering this question.
Isn't art about truth? I did not want the inclusion of the pieces that illustrate the orbit, as you're aware, just because I wasn't happy with the way it was resolved.
I cannot answer that question, and I don't see the show as a group, and this will be the last comment. I'm sorry. I don't see the show as an aggregation of individual objects. I see it, as Tom alluded to earlier, as an experience. It has a theatricality. It has a sense of drama and mystery and wholeness. It's a thing in itself. And I love all my children, or all of his children.
Probably have some more questions. John, ask me something.
Well, how much were you affected by the stories behind all these pieces that you're showing us?
Very much. That was it. That was very exciting, very inspirational. Like, everywhere you turn, there's an amazing story. Whether it's how the actuators work behind the mirrors, it's just this amazing creative genius behind it. So much of this. So, yes. Ask something.
I guess not something, right?
I'm curious to know, with how many people have you talked about when it comes to engineers, scientists? Because it feels like you have really done a deep dive into the telescope.
Not that many. I don't know. There's a lot of information on the internet, but I have come across some people. So one example is I reached out when I had the exhibition at the National Academy of Science to a bunch of people just to see all the contractors if they had any interest in buying this work. And they're like, hey, good job, the thing worked. You should be proud. Would you like to buy one of my pictures? Put on your conference room. So I sent one of these blind emails off to everybody, including the European Space Agency. And no one answered, of course, because it just went to some junk pile. But one person did answer, and her name is Gillian Wright from European Space Agency, from the Royal Observatory of Edinburgh. And she was one of the primary people on this camera. And she's like, oh, we don't have any money to buy anything, but, you've been talking about your work here in Edinburgh. I was like, well, that's cool. That's all I want. So that was fantastic. And then at the opening of the show the other day, a guy came up to me. He was here down the hall at his daughter's choral recital. And he's not an art guy. He didn't come here to the museum. He came to see his daughter, and he was just killing time. And he walked in here, and he was just like, what is going on? I worked on this telescope. How did this come to be here? I was like, oh, that's so cool. He's like, I don't have to explain any of this to you. It's like, you know what that is? Like, oh yeah, that's the orbital position. I'm like, oh yeah, that's the mirror cam. I know what I'm looking at. This is good. So I don't know, that was a huge honor, and that drives me on. I love that.
We may have to.
One more?